This is crazy. We've got undercover agents operating behind enemy lines, air and naval gunfire being brought in danger close to support troops in contact, and reinforcements fighting their way through a dense urban battlefield to make sure that everyone makes it out. The new details coming out around this Israeli hostage rescue operation sound like something straight out of a movie. Now, this is according to a new article published in the Jewish Chronicle titled The Inside Story of Israel's Dramatic Gaza Hostage Rescue, where they say on May 12th, Israeli intelligence received information about the location of 4 hostages in the Nusrat refugee camp. From that day on, every branch of Israeli intelligence was focused on the area 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to identify the exact location. They added that a team of undercover agents were then sent there, mainly in the local market of Nusrat. Now, to give you an idea, big picture of where we're looking, we've got all of Israel here, zooming into the Gaza Strip in the southwest portion. This is live UA map, a publicly available resource. Nusrat here is in the central portion of the Gaza Strip, this dense urban terrain, as is much of Gaza. So as we talk about this operation, know that this is the general area we're going to be talking about. Now, a couple notes on the timelines here. It looks like it was roughly 3.5 weeks after the initial intelligence was identified to when the operation kicked off. I did see some speculation over the course of the last few days that Israel may have known about the hostage location for quite a while longer. 3.5 weeks it kind of fits, right? It takes a long time to confirm the intelligence, something we're going to get into here in a minute, rehearse the operation, and actually kick it off under the right circumstances. Now, I understand that if you're the hostage or the hostage family and you find out about the location of the hostages Tuesday morning, you want them to go in Tuesday afternoon or maybe Wednesday morning, but it takes a while, and 3.5 weeks feels about right to, again, verify that information, make sure that you're going into an area, putting troops at risk to actually extract hostages, and then to be able to do it in a way where you're pulling them out alive and not risking everybody's life during the course of that raid. They said that after 19 days of intensive cooperative intelligence gathering, the combined units managed to compile solid and accurate information about the location of the Israeli hostages. It was discovered that the hostages were being held in 2 separate buildings in the same area. Noah Argamani was held in the first floor of one, and 3 other hostages were held in another building 800 meters away on the 3rd floor. Nothing groundbreaking there. That's information we have already heard about this operation, but it sounds like they verified that very quickly once they were on the ground. They said in order to verify the information and prepare the ground for the operation, another team of undercover soldiers, including several women dressed in hijabs and long black dresses, was sent into the Nusrat refugee camp pretending to be 2 Gazan families looking for a large house. They arrived in 2 cheap-looking old cars with domestic items characteristic of those families displaced in the strip, such as mattresses and clothing identical to those of the locals. Undercover agents. And a couple thoughts here. First, it's not clear from this reporting what agency they're a part of. They're certainly part of the Israeli government, but if they're from an intelligence apparatus, if they're from the police, if they're from the military, I didn't see that called out, which isn't shocking. They're undercover agents, so they want to maintain the some secrecy there, right? But it's not clear exactly what organization, from my perspective, these undercover agents came from. Now, these undercover agents, they say that when they arrived in the Nusrat refugee camp, they were asked by locals, what are you doing here? And their story was that they had come from Rafah due to the, quote, deadly shelling from the Israeli army and decided to rent a house in the area. They pointed to the building where Noah Argamani was being held, and they showed the locals a large amount of cash and offered to pay 3 times the going rate for rent. The local agreed to help, and within 3 hours had found a house on the street where Argamani was held that these, undercover agents could then rent. A couple days later, it says that they had confirmed that they hadn't aroused any suspicion. The undercover agents went out shopping in the local market to gather more intelligence from the immediate vicinity, with their primary focus here, of course, being verifying the exact location where the hostages were being held. They split into 2 separate teams. One team consisted of 2 commandos, a male dressed as a typical Gazan local, and a woman dressed in a long black dress and hijab. Behind them walked 4 more undercover agents armed to give backup in the event that they were discovered. So again, remember, we had 2 separate teams infill into Gaza at this point. Haven't seen a total breakdown of the numbers, but you kind of get the idea. It's in the 12 to 20 range at least. But a note on these undercover agents operating in Gaza, just to be clear, if they're detected, they're going to die. Like, they're working for the Israeli government in the middle of Hamas-controlled territory. The armed guards walking a little ways behind them, of course, it would have to be some sort of small arms that they could conceal somehow inside of their everyday dress to not give off the impression that they're bodyguards walking through the street, right? But that might provide some solace. But realistically, if any of these agents are discovered while they're conducting this operation, it's unlikely they're going to leave Gaza alive. Now, the second team here, they said, consisted of 4 female soldiers dressed as typical Arab women, one pretending to be pregnant, carrying plastic bags full of food products and vegetables. They said they walked in 2 pairs towards a nearby residential building where on the 3rd floor, the 3 male hostages were being held. Behind them also walked 4 more undercover men armed to give them backup. They added that some of the undercover agents remained behind in the apartment building to kind of watch there, keep an eye on a couple different buildings, and to make sure that nobody, broke into their facility and try to figure out what they were up to. They added, now, they kind of skipped ahead here, and I'll talk about this in a second, but they said now it was confirmed. The 4 hostages were being held in 2 homes of Gazan families. The force commander confirmed to Israel that the 2 locations were correct. Now, there's no information. When I say they skipped over stuff here, they really don't get into how that information was obtained, how they verified the information on the ground of the exact location of these hostages, because especially the 3 on the 3rd floor, it's not like they would have walked up, knocked on the door, I don't think, and actually been able to visually confirm the hostages were there. But this is also something that Israel and any government would like to keep under wraps, the means of how they procure some of their intelligence. Moving on, they say 28 elite fighters from the Yamam unit, a police commando organization that specializes in fighting terrorists and rescuing hostages, began training on 2 specially built models that replicated the 2 buildings where the hostages were being held. After 3 days of training, the commander of the force informed the IDF chief of staff, who then informed the minister of defense that they were ready to carry out the operation. So I want to highlight here that, I think we get the impression at times that some of these more elite units, like the Yamam force here, you can just, point in a direction and then go and carry out some, hyper complex raid in a very dangerous situation. And yes, they are more than capable of doing something like that. But if they have the time, and it looks like they felt like they had the time in this situation, there's so much value in being able to put together a mock-up of the exact situation you're going to run through, right? Rather than just, it's time to go, we think there's a hostage on the 3rd floor of that building, go get them. Being able to run through an exact replica of what you're going to find on the ground and kind of rehearse until it's really drilled in ensures that even the most elite of units have a higher likelihood of mission success. So in this case, they took a period of time to make sure they were ready before actually kicking this thing off. They say on Thursday, June 5th, the night of June 5th, the undercovers were ordered to leave the area of the Nusrat refugee camp without arousing suspicion, although 4 remained to keep an eye on the buildings to make sure that the hostages were not transferred to another location. So they just kind of, in the middle of the night, up and left, right? Find a way to kind of sneak back out of Nusrat. I'd be interested, and this is not going to be information we get anytime soon, as to how these undercover agents were added to and then extracted, how they infilled and extracted from Gaza. Like, how did they get them in and get them out successfully? I mean, Israel has forces all around the Gaza Strip, but you can't imagine they just walk straight through the lines because that would arouse some sort of suspicion. But either way, the night before this raid kicks off, the undercover agents exited the area, most of them at least. Then on Friday morning, June 6th, the 28 commandos of the Yamam unit began making their way in 2 teams towards the buildings in the Nusrat refugee camp. To maintain the element of surprise as much as possible, the unit's fighters traveled hiding in 2 trucks. Now, a couple notes here, because this has been a point of contention that I've seen spreading across the internet in recent days, the types of trucks they use to get there. There is a picture that I'll share showing one truck, kind of van-looking vehicle, that had a ladder attached to the top. It looks like this was used for one aspect of entering the 3-story building where the 3 male hostages were being held. But there was a lot of speculation that I've seen that a humanitarian aid truck or aid trucks were being used to facilitate this operation. I haven't seen evidence to support that, and it seems unlikely. And the reason for that is, as we're watching this or hearing about this operation playing out, the primary goal here is to not arouse suspicion, right? They don't want people to notice what they're doing. They want to blend in. A humanitarian aid truck doesn't blend in. It gets a lot of attention from the moment it crosses the border into Gaza. And as we're going to see in a second here, the truck has to park and wait for the green light for all assets to be on station before they go ahead. You can't do that in a humanitarian aid truck in Gaza, right? The aid truck is going to have a lot of attention from the moment it crosses the border. It might get swamped by Gazans trying to receive that aid. There's going to be a lot of questions as to why is this thing not going to the aid distribution point, and it certainly can't park on the side of the street and just wait for some green light to carry out an operation. So if they used a humanitarian aid truck, it was the opposite of what they were actually going for here, right? So I would argue at this point that's probably not the means they used to infill the Commandos into Gaza. They say just before 11 a.m., the Commandos arrived with precise timing at the 2 targets and awaited the order to attack. Remember, 2 target locations, so these 2 trucks would have split off, or multiple trucks would have split off into 2 different areas, and they waited to hit the objectives at the same time. We've talked about it before. The major concern from Israel here was if one of the hostage rescues was underway, the other group might be tipped off and they could move the hostages or kill the hostages. So they conducted both raids simultaneously. Once they were given the green light, they said the Israeli soldiers eliminated the terrorists guarding Noah and within 6 minutes had rescued her unharmed from the apartment. They then took her to a waiting helicopter that immediately flew her back to Israel. And we have footage of that helicopter taking off from the Gaza shoreline with the U.S.-built pier in the background, which, side note, appears now that it's been taken down again, moved over due to high winds and high seas and all that stuff. But anyways, this matches a lot of the initial reporting we got, saying that the rescue of Noah was actually pretty seamless. Went according to plan. They were pretty quick, 6 minutes, in, out, get her to an extraction point. That's impressive work for a elite unit like this. Now, the other 3 hostages did not go according to plan. And also this links up exactly with some of the initial reporting that we got the day of. They said those 3 male hostages, were held in the home of Dr. Ahmed al-Jamal, a medical doctor who was a Hamas activist, and his son, Abdullah, a journalist who had written for Al Jazeera, who was also staying in the apartment. Side note here, there's been a lot of focus on Abdullah being a journalist for Al Jazeera. And I feel like that's not really the primary piece here, because he was at one point wrote a couple articles for Al Jazeera as a freelancer. The Palestine Chronicle, his work there, I feel like is so much more applicable to what we're talking about here, because for that publication, he was writing articles while these hostages were being held in his home. I feel like, there's a big desire to time Al Jazeera, but I think a bigger focus should be he's writing articles for this publication while there are Israeli hostages at his house. They say some of the commandos used a ladder to enter directly into the room where the 3 hostages were held. This coincided with the entry of the rest of the force who came up the stairs to the main entrance of the building. And we have a picture of that truck being used in the front. I got to crop it a little bit because there's some bodies laying around. This was taken after the course of the operation. And then we do have some videos of the soldiers moving through the first floor entrance. They say Commander Arnon Zamora's team, which broke into the apartment at the head of the force, encountered massive fire from around 30 Hamas terrorists in the apartment. They fired with machine guns, threw grenades, and some even fired RPGs at the surprised Israelis, which is how Arnon Zamora was killed. Now, I want to stress the challenges of fighting an unconventional war like this, because you can't tell who the enemy is, right? There were intelligence assets watching this building with agents on the ground trying to identify a big portion of what they're relaying back to their command and control is how many fighters do you think are guarding those hostages? Because it's an entirely different force structure you put together if it's 1, 0, or 20, right? So the agents got this wrong. They missed this. And it just speaks to how difficult it is to fight a type of unconventional war like this, because you can see men and women coming from the building all day or living in their apartments in this same structure, but they're not wearing Hamas uniforms, right? So you can't easily count which ones are militants and which ones aren't. They're also not just walking around the street in the middle of the day with RPGs over their shoulders or AKs slung under their arm. They're stashed apparently in this building and others. So when the time comes and they want to use those weapons, they're right there, but the agents on the ground and certainly no aerial footage overhead would have been able to identify just how many of them were there, ready to take up arms and engage the Israeli forces. And I mean, RPG fire inside of a building is no joke. This is a platoon-sized element that the Israelis found themselves up against during this portion of the rescue. They say the 3 hostages had to hide in the bathroom of the apartment, protected by several Israeli soldiers during the fighting. There was no way to leave the apartment due to the massive unexpected gunfire as it might endanger the hostages. The Israelis started making their way out of the building, several of them carrying their commander on a stretcher, running through smoke-filled alleys and the nearby market, which was crowded with thousands of Gazans. They say the Israeli forces tried under constant fire to get to the rescue vehicles that was waiting for them, but it was hit twice by RPGs. Now, at this point, I don't believe these are armored vehicles that they're trying to exfil in. Just because, remember, this is still kind of the undercover operation. They used civilian vehicles to infill to the objective area. I don't know if it's necessarily the same vehicles they were planning on exiting with, or there are other vehicles staged nearby. But either way, a couple RPGs to a civilian vehicle, to a truck, is going to put it out of commission. So that appears to have been what happened here. As a result of that, the commander of the operation back in Israel in the Command and Control Center activated Plan B, the rescue plan that had been prepared in advance, a daring operation under massive, very close fire from the enemy, covered by Israeli fire from ground, sea, and air. And this is where multiple targets engaged by aircraft overhead, helicopters, and fixed-wing platforms, as well as naval gunfire. They say with the help of tanks, hundreds of soldiers from the Golani and Gavanti infantry brigades and paratroopers charged on foot into the refugee camp, fighting face-to-face battles with Hamas terrorists, while Navy ships covered them from the west and Air Force helicopters from the east. Fire from the air hit terrorists within just 10 meters of the Israeli soldiers. There's dangers close, and then there's 10 meters. 10 meters is well inside of danger close for just about anything that can be fired from overhead. And we did get some footage just a couple days ago, just yesterday actually, showing some of these reinforcements rushing to the scene, and you can see the sense of urgency in these soldiers as they take off, exiting their armored vehicles or running in to try to secure these hostages and the hostage rescue team that now needed help with their extraction. They go on to say that Hamas claims that during the rescue operation in the crowded streets of the refugee camp, 274 Palestinians were killed. However, the IDF says that 104 Palestinians were killed or wounded, all of whom were Hamas terrorists or armed civilians who collaborated with the terrorist organization. Look, in a dense urban battlefield, in a way that Israel just described this battle taking place, it's impossible to have zero civilian casualties. Just, bullets, even if you hit the Hamas fighter with your round, it often can go through them and continue traveling. Or one round misses, who knows what it hits at the end of the street. So even if the Israeli forces can guarantee that they never deliberately targeted any civilians or anyone that wasn't carrying a weapon or firing back at them, there's still going to be collateral damage. There's still going to be civilians wounded and or killed. Again, we have the mix here with 274 being the Hamas figure, 104 killed and wounded coming from Israel. But either way, those are some pretty interesting details coming out of this rescue operation, right? I mean, it all things considered went according to plan. Right? The goal was to get 4 hostages out alive, and the IDF managed to get 4 hostages out alive. Pretty complex and interesting that they shared some of the details about the infiltration of agents into Gaza prior to this kicking off for a couple of reasons. It might limit their ability to do that in the future. Maybe, but it's also going to raise a lot of concern amongst Hamas of, wait a minute, how many Israeli agents are actually walking around here? And they might tighten down the hatch a little bit, make future hostages harder to find, or move them now into different locations, secure locations, where they can be sure that the people around them have no affiliation at all with the Israeli government. But I'll link this article in the description below if you want to check it out. It's in its entirety. Again, pretty interesting, a lot of details there. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security topics, coverage of war and conflict around the world, be sure to check out our Substack, which is linked in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.